There comes a moment in every nation's journey when the world turns its back and silence replaces promises. But the test of a country's soul ain't in the hands it's shaken, it's in the fist it clenches when left to stand alone. Loyalty isn't something you truly understand when everything is calm. When the skies are clear and the road ahead is smooth, it's easy to call someone a friend, a partner, an ally. Promises are plentiful, smiles are cheap, speeches are written with polished words, handshakes captured in flashing cameras, and commitments are made with conviction that rarely gets tested. But that's the thing about peace. It rarely asks for proof. It rarely demands a sacrifice. It doesn't shake the ground hard enough to know who still stands beside you when the dust settles. But isolation, now that's where truth reveals itself. That's where the curtain drops. In isolation, you don't hear applause, you hear silence. And in that silence, you learn what was real and what was rehearsed. When a nation stands at the crossroads of betrayal and resolve, that's where loyalty stops being a word and starts being a decision. India, a land that has weathered centuries of conquest, famine, division, and deception, knows this lesson in its bones. It knows what it means to be promised protection only to be handed silence when the hour strikes. It knows what it's like to build trust with nations that speak of shared values, only to be reminded at the worst possible moment that loyalty is often conditional in global politics. When you stand alone on the battlefield of diplomacy, not with weapons but with expectations, that's when you see who comes running and who turns their back. And when the ones you trusted most look the other way, pretending not to hear your voice, pretending not to see your hand extended, that's when the question arises. Was it ever loyalty, or was it just convenience dressed as commitment? It's easy to support a rising power when that power aligns with your interests. It's easy to cheer for India's growth, its democracy, its economy, its culture, when it suits the headlines. But the real test of respect, of partnership, of alliance is when India faces pressure, threats, or even isolation for simply standing up for itself. That's when those who claim to be allies must prove whether their support runs deeper than diplomacy, whether their friendship can survive the storm. And yet, time and time again, history has shown when India stands alone, it stands taller. Not because it wants to, but because it's had to. When backs turned and voices faded, India didn't fall into despair. It turned inward and drew from a well of resilience that no foreign policy could define. Loyalty for India has never been about blind allegiance. It has always been about mutual respect, earned trust, and shared purpose. But when those things are betrayed, when silence replaces solidarity, India doesn't collapse, it adapts, it remembers, and it recalibrates its path, not out of bitterness, but from a sharpened sense of clarity. Being left alone is never easy. It tests your morale, it challenges your resolve, and it exposes your vulnerabilities. But it also awakens something deep, something ancient, something unshakable, because when the world steps back, India steps forward, not with a roar of anger, but with a calm certainty that greatness is never handed over in treaties. It is forged in solitude. When loyalty fades, clarity rises. And in that clarity, India finds its true strength, not in who stands beside it, but in who it becomes when it stands alone, not in the promises made during calm, but in the principles held firm during storms. So let the moments of isolation come, let the betrayals cut deep, let the silence echo, because the one who survives silence, the one who thrives in abandonment, is the one who no longer needs validation to know its worth. And in that awakening, India becomes not a follower of alliances, but the architect of its own legacy. Being abandoned is one of the deepest wounds a nation can carry. It isn't just the absence of support, it's the betrayal of expectation, the quiet departure of those who once pledged solidarity, who once stood in the light beside you, only to vanish into the shadows when the night fell hardest. And it hurts, because trust, once broken, doesn't shatter loudly, it dissolves quietly, leaving behind only questions where certainty used to live. India has known this pain before, the sting of being sidelined, overlooked, underestimated, of being treated as a partner in words but a pawn in action. It's the kind of pain that doesn't just linger in headlines. It seeps into the conscience of a people. It whispers doubts. It breathes anger. It plants the seeds of disillusionment. But pain is a strange thing. It can destroy, yes, but it can also define. In the crucible of abandonment, a different kind of power is born. A fire that no alliance can ignite and no betrayal can extinguish. It is the power of becoming unstoppable, not because you are pushed forward, but because you refuse to fall back. When India is left behind, it doesn't vanish. It evolves. It doesn't crumble under pressure. It uses it as the very force to reshape its future. When doors close, India builds its own entrances. When partners hesitate, India accelerates. That transformation from dependence to dominance is not forged in moments of comfort. It is chiseled by the blades of rejection. To become unstoppable is not to act out of revenge. It's to act out of realization, the realization that no one else will carry your weight, that no one else will fight your battles, that no matter how global the stage becomes, the core of your strength must remain local, sovereign, and unshakably yours. Being unstoppable doesn't mean being loud. It means being sure. Sure of your direction, sure of your values, sure of your purpose, even when the world seems unsure of your place in it. And that kind of certainty can't be borrowed. It must be earned. In the face of abandonment, India's journey has never been linear. From colonization to liberation, from aid to autonomy, from silence to leadership, each chapter came with its own betrayal, but each betrayal birthed a breakthrough. Every time the world tried to write India off, India rewrote the script. Abandonment creates space, painful space, but in that space, growth becomes possible. Innovation becomes urgent. Self-reliance becomes non-negotiable. Suddenly, every setback is seen not as a punishment, but as a preparation. Because only in the absence of help do you truly learn what you're capable of. And India has learned. It has learned that resilience isn't built in the warmth of alliances, it's carved in the cold of abandonment. It has learned that to be left behind is not to be defeated, is to be unleashed. So let the world walk away, let the promises fade, let the support disappear when it's needed most, because the pain will pass, but the power forged in that pain, that stays, that grows, that transforms a once dependent nation into a self-sustained force. Unstoppable isn't a label others give you. It's an identity you claim when there's no one left to cheer you on. It's a spirit that walks alone but moves mountains. It's the quiet certainty that you no longer wait for doors to open because you've learned to break through walls. India, time and again, has shown that betrayal doesn't break it, it builds it. Each time it's pushed down, it rises higher. Each time it's abandoned, it becomes more prepared, more determined, more unshakable. Because what they thought would weaken India only awakened it. What they thought would silence India only gave it a reason to speak louder, act faster, and rise stronger. The pain was real, but the power it created, that was unstoppable. India doesn't break when betrayed, it builds when burned. This is not just a phrase, it's a pattern stitched deep into the nation's history. India has been burned before by colonizers, by invaders, by double-tongued promises from so-called allies, and even by internal divisions. Every time the flames rose high, they didn't consume the spirit of the nation, they refined it. Betrayal is a peculiar kind of fire. It doesn't announce itself like war does. It creeps in slowly, through handshakes that meant nothing, through alliances that evaporate when courage is required, through smiles that hide hesitation. And when the heat finally comes, you realize you were never truly back. But what does India do then? It doesn't fall to its knees. It doesn't beg. It doesn't retreat into sorrow. Instead, it walks into the fire and lets it burn everything that was borrowed, everything that was never truly its own. And then, brick by brick, it begins again, not with revenge, but with resolve, not with fury, but with focus. Because when the world turns its back, India turns inward, not in fear, but in preparation. History has shown us time and time again. Betrayed during partition, India bled, but it didn't break. It rebuilt. Abandoned during wars, it stood its ground, developed its own strength, forged its own steel, sanctioned and shunned after nuclear tests. India didn't crumble under pressure. It walked into global forums with its head held high and its sovereignty intact. That's the India the world often forgets, the one that doesn't rely on validation, the one that finds clarity in crisis. It's easy to support a nation when it's convenient, but it's only when support is withdrawn that you learn who you really are, and India has learned. It has learned to build its own satellites when others denied it technology, to craft its own medicine when global supply chains grew uncertain, to feed its people from its own soil when foreign aid came with hidden strength. Being burned teaches you where your strength begins and where your illusions end. It strips you of dependency, of naivety, of the comfortable lie that someone else will always have your back. And when you emerge from that fire, you're leaner, sharper, stronger. India has never claimed to be perfect, but it has proven again and again that it is prepared to rise from its lowest moments. Because betrayal may wound, but it also wakes you up. It makes you reevaluate, reposition, reignite. And when India builds after being burned, it doesn't build back what it lost. It builds something stronger, wiser, something that no longer needs permission to lead, to innovate, to defend, to decide. That's the power of a country that refuses to be broken, not just out of pride, but out of necessity. When trust is shattered, it doesn't pick up the same pieces and hope for a different outcome. It forges new ones from its own soil, its own hands, its own spirit. And the world watches, some with admiration, some with fear, some with the uncomfortable realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they misjudge India's silence for weakness. Because silence in India's case is not surrender, it's strategy. And betrayal, though painful, only pushes the nation closer to independence in every form: strategic, technological, diplomatic. So yes, betray India, and you will not see it crumble, you will see it craft, you will see it create, you will see it climb. Not in spite of the burn, but because of it. The fire doesn't destroy India. It defines it, not with smoke, but with vision, not with ash, but with ambition. And in that fire, India doesn't find defeat, it finds direction. When alliances crumble, self-reliance becomes destiny. There comes a moment in every nation's journey when the promises of others dissolve like sand slipping through open fingers. When allies retreat behind polished statements and support is postponed behind layers of diplomatic delay, that moment, quiet, cold, undeniable, is where the illusion ends. And in that space, between what was promised and what was delivered, a choice emerges. Wait for the world to return, and begin building a world of your own. India has seen this moment more than once. It has stood at the edge of hope, watching alliances fracture under pressure, watching partners turn neutral when conviction was required, watching coalitions of convenience fall silent when India's voice grew firm. And in those moments, when all the signals pointed to abandonment, India didn't collapse into despair. It simply turned inward, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Because if history has taught India one thing, it is this: no one will invest in your sovereignty more than you will. No one will guard your interests more fiercely than you. No matter how many joint declarations are signed, no matter how many summits are attended. When the winds change, the only compass that counts is your own. When alliances crumbled, what's revealed isn't just the fragility of friendships, it's the urgency of self-reliance. Suddenly, the borrowed time runs out. The foreign hand retracts. The backup plans vanish. And in that void, a new resolve is born. To no longer wait, no longer ask, no longer depend. That's not just strategy, that's survival. That's destiny. Self-reliance isn't just about producing what you need. It's about becoming who you need to be. It's the shift from asking, will they support us, to stating, we will support ourselves. It's the quiet evolution from reliance to resilience, from being a stakeholder in someone else's vision to becoming the architect of your own. India's journey reflects this truth. When denied technology, it developed its own. When left out of alliances, it created regional strength. When pressured to conform, it forged a path that honored its principles, not just its partners. Each time the world turned away, India turned deeper into its own potential. And there, in its own soil, its own minds, its own vision, it found answers more reliable than any external alliance could offer. Because the foundation of true power is not how many friends stand beside you during peace. It's how well you stand alone during conflict. And India has shown that standing alone is not a burden. It's a badge. It's proof that your sovereignty isn't rented, that your progress isn't borrowed, that your path forward doesn't need to be approved by a committee of spectators. This self-reliance doesn't reject the world. It redefines the terms of engagement. It invites cooperation, not dependence, partnership, not patronage. And in doing so, it commands respect, not for how loudly it demands it, but for how firmly it earns it. When alliances crumble, you either mourn or you move. India chose to move, to build missiles when sanctions hit, to grow startups when markets hesitated, to connect villages when the world focused only on cities, to go to Mars when many questioned whether it should even try. This isn't arrogance, it's awakening. The moment when India realized it doesn't need permission to dream or validation to act. When it chose to become a creator of destiny rather than a consumer of favors. Because alliances may shift with political tides, but self-reliance, that becomes a nation's compass, its armor, its anthem. And as India walks this path, not isolated, but independent, not abandoned, but ascending, it teaches the world that when alliances fall, it's not the end of progress. Sometimes it's the beginning of greatness.